Thank you very much. There's great cloud to come out actually after lunch, so I'm hopefully going to energise you a little bit, talk a bit about government transformation and why it's been so important and why it's so important to the work that we do in the public sector. And we had a good turnout earlier this morning. I'm Liam Maxwell. I'm the Director of Government Transformation at AWS, and I run a team of senior leaders who have all worked in the public sector before, and they're all former public service leaders who've led nation-scale reforms. So they are people who've led organisations and government services across their respective countries through a major change. So Mike Bevan led the main transformation programme in the United Kingdom, transforming 20 services in 500 days. Jane Treadwell was one of the first CIOs in Australia at the national level, and then did a huge amount of work in the World Bank. Choi Peng Wu is the former and founding CIO of Singapore, and also then CIO of Singtel, and was really responsible for the structure and the building of the Singapore miracle, I suppose, is the way of describing what's happened in Singapore. Huge changes there. Manu Shukla led the transformation of Rajasthan in India. Alex Holmes was the leader and Chief Operating Officer of the Government Digital Service, and then led the cyber security for the United Kingdom. And Maria Ines Bach is the former head of Permanent Secretary of Modernisation of Argentina. So around the world, my team have put together nation-scale reforms, and the work that we do is that we help governments and government leaders understand how to make the reforms and modernise and accelerate their modernisation and reform programmes. So we have a very strong advisory function, but we also have other functions which I'll come to during this talk. But the main aim of my team is to help public service leaders drive their transformation. So it's not about selling AWS product. It's about helping people understand how to make the changes and to drive through their reforms, and also help champion those reforms amongst the teams. I talk about it because I was the CTO of the United Kingdom as we went through our major changes. And so we've all had that experience of what it's like to face the bureaucratic, but also the organizational, procurement obstacles that we meet. I'm going to just to summarise there, we help our customers accelerate their reforms and modernisation, and we generally work with operational leaders. So if you are a partner in the organisation today, we're also here to help you work with the operational leaders in government, so the executives, to help them understand and help them move forward their modernisation programmes. Now, one of the things we wanted to do, we had a wealth of stories to tell you, but we also had a very changing travel environment. And about 3 or 4 months ago, we took the decision that rather than fly in 4 or 5 experts to come and talk with you on the stage, we would distill and condense their words into some short clips which come together with this team. So this is the first time I've done a talk publicly where I actually am going to start to refer back to people on the screen. So it's rather like running a strange TV program. Bear with me as I do it. We think it flows quite well. But coming up to talk to us are the real world leaders in transformation in public service. So Ganga from the Aadhaar program in India, something we'll talk about in a moment, but a huge program. Warren Smith from the Digital Marketplace in the United Kingdom, Rose from the Department for Education, Ian McCormick from the National Cyber Security Centre, and Chan Cho Ho, who some of you may know, I mean, really, really transformative leader in Singapore. We're going to hear from all of them today as we go through this. So when you sit and think, what are the forms of transformation? What are the 3 themes that we go through in transformation? We sort of distilled this into 3 main components. If you get these right, things will start to work. The first point is trust. If we're going to work in the public service with citizens, the citizens do need to trust the government that's providing the services. And that trust takes the form of making sure everything is secure, but also that it's actually going to be there. And I don't want to sound too basic about it, but it's also got to work. And as we saw during COVID, and the examples I'll show you later, that speed of operation and the scale that government works at is different in any other market segment, because you work for everybody. It's a really big change. So that idea of having trust. The second thing is to focus on users, because without those users and building services around the user, you're actually not going to engage with your user base. They're not going to get the services you want them to have. So however big and fast and great you are, if you're not engaging with your users, you need to actually be able to design for them. They're the people that are paid for the services. And then the third thing is you do actually need to deliver. And what we talk about during this, and Rose is going to talk a little bit about this, is building small. Start small so that you can start to build the services that work for people. So bear those three things in mind. You need the trust, you need to work for your users, but you've also got to continuously deliver for them. And so let's think about some transformation successes. And I still go back to a year later, I'm still looking at some of these examples of great success which came through and succeeded in the pandemic. And the pandemic was a period when people turned not to their government, not just to look at public services as an efficient form of public service, but in many communities, the government and the public service delivery was the glue that held together communities. So, some examples. New South Wales, health pathology, they had to turn around and start to communicate effectively with a serious group of users across New South Wales quickly and effectively so that they could get their test results back for COVID-19. Now, remember, in the very early days of this was taking a long time to come through. And so they worked, and they went from 7 days to a few hours using an SMS solution so they could quickly and effectively give out the information. And by automating that process, they saved 3 years in the manual time it would take to individually contact people. So just by moving to a different method of delivery, quickly, simply, effectively, that meant they could start to save serious time with their users. Here's an example from the United States. When the COVID pandemic came through and lots of people moved on to or were not going into work and had to start claiming unemployment benefits, the changes that happened to state governments happened very quickly. And for those who'd been working for many years with essentially quite old tech, this was particularly difficult. In Rhode Island, the 10 days to the cloud using Amazon's Connect program was a really quick way of being able to spin up the ability to talk to your customers and listen to what your citizens were asking for and help them quickly and effectively, and moving from a huge change there in the number of calls that people could take at any one time, from 75 calls at once going up to 2,000 calls at once. And this was a big burst movement that happened over a 45-day period. We saw 140,000 claims processed. This ability to spin up a cloud service so that you could deliver a great call center experience to people that were in need, needed to have information quickly, whilst you were all outside the office, was one of the big changes. And I remember in the United Kingdom, the team that went to go and talk to one of the ministers who was saying we need to reach out to 1.5 million people very quickly. And he was expecting them to say, okay, so it's going to take about 3 weeks to set it up and do it, and then you can announce it, and then we'll be in a position to do it. And they turned around and said, yeah, we'll do that tomorrow afternoon, and you can announce it on the talk shows on Sunday morning. Just a huge change in the speed that people can operate, because you don't have to start building all that infrastructure up. Last year, we really looked around the world at some responsive governments. Here's another really good example. In Sardinia, Cagliari, which is obviously looks like a wonderful place, and I've never enforced my right to go and visit this to see it. But Cagliari, an amazing, but the organisation and the public service there were running on quite old technology, which was all old, in the office, difficult to work with. By deploying a remote desktop, by deploying workspaces, they were able to get everybody to work from home quickly and effectively using the cloud to enable that work to go ahead. They could stay in touch and reach out and communicate with all of their citizens quickly, effectively. Over a very short period, 500 people managed to set up their offices working from home. Same thing with remote learning. About 30% of Italy's school children went onto Chime, which you may know is an Amazon service, in a period of under 2 weeks. So that ability to move at scale and that ability to move at speed was one of the things we really learned from this. Now I'm going to give you something of a slightly different scale now. This is one we found really, really challenging. In India, they needed to get a vaccine process working and an online process working to monitor the real-time data from vaccine registration to the delivery of your certification. Everyone's been doing that. The problem with the government of India, they've got to do it for 1.2 billion people. So think about the scale of that, of being able to build a service rapidly, quickly, effectively, and then deploy that to 1.2 billion people. Yes, you've got to get that right at the beginning, but wow, that was a really huge change in the way that you could reach out and provide a service that had never been done before in a matter of weeks to that many people. And it's been the ability to deliver 1.77 billion doses in that period of time. Note also, one of the big things about transformation is the very public explanation of data. That by explaining the data and talking about the data you're using, governments find, public service organizations find it easier to explain what they're doing and how to make it work. So, what's behind all these? What do all these things have in common? What are the steps to transformation that we've seen people use? Well, we put it down to 5 steps. 4 steps. Getting a clear vision. Being really open about what the benefits are. Getting the executives to buy into it. And then momentum. And I can't emphasize enough how much that momentum is really the thing you're striving for. All those 3 things at the beginning are the first steps to that. So, think about a big idea. What is the big idea that you want to go for? The first thing to do is to try and communicate and articulate a big idea to make the service clear and effective to work. Everyone knows about great, simple ideas. I think it's any book, anytime, anywhere, which is the Kindle's view of how you go and read things, or a really simple political idea. There was education was the incoming government in 1997 in the UK. By being really clear about what you were doing, you're able to communicate that effectively. So, first guest speaker, Chan Cho Ho, speaking from Singapore.
As and when a citizen of a business has to come to the government, that moment of truth is actually very important. It has to be as seamless as possible. It has to be in a situation whereby people can get their things done quickly. So this is where we started this concept, what we call moments of life. We find that throughout your life, there are many occasions where you have to go to the government, whether it's registering the birth, claiming in Singapore what we call a baby bonus, registering a whole bunch of other things that needs to be done. Now, these things are, well, they're not exactly pleasant to do, but they have to be done. And the best thing for government to do is to make it as seamless as possible.
Just getting through that. These are things you've got to do. We want to make it as seamless as possible. Just having that idea that you want to do a seamless, simple, straightforward transaction is the rallying point behind all of the reforms that are happening in Singapore. They want these things to happen, but everything has to be seamless. Second thing is, think about the benefits. How do you articulate the benefits of what you want to do to your organization and to your leadership? Now, sometimes that can be really difficult. If you're looking at a major change to, say, an education system, it's quite difficult to identify what the benefits are, how to work it through, and then you're doing it in a completely modern way. There's a new way of working. So how do you approach that and do that effectively? Here are 2 perspectives coming through. One from Rose Mortada, who's the leader of in the Department of Education in the United Kingdom, talking about how they make those changes. And then secondly, there's Mike Bevan's going to come and talk a little bit about the organizational barriers you're going to face as you start to do your transformation. And I'm sure that those of you working in transformation will recognize some of these as they come through.
the needs of our internal customer or stakeholder is absolutely crucial to being able to deliver value to users. And we need to gain the confidence of stakeholders and get them on board.
The challenge with using agile techniques in large organisations that have more traditional governance models is that they're not really set up to deal in that way. They kind of like certainty, they like long-term planning, and they're obviously very focused around risk. And risk is managed in a very different way in an agile program. If you have a risk, you actually go and test it. You don't write it down on a register somewhere and put it to one side. So all these techniques just don't look familiar, and they're not what people are used to. And people, human beings, tend to rely on what they knew before and what they know or believe has to have worked in the past.
Often we have challenges in this space because our stakeholders are used to more waterfall ways of working. They're used to things like Gantt charts and long risk logs and other kind of things that you would associate with Prince2 projects, whereas our agile digital teams want to do show and tells, and they usually avoid lots of paperwork.
And the mistakes I see made is people overusing jargon, kind of saying, don't worry, it's agile, it'll all be fine, and all these sorts of things that just kind of put the hackles up of senior stakeholders. So you've got to take the time to explain to them, but more importantly, show how it's delivering value.
It doesn't need to fix every problem. It just needs to show an intent, and you can use that to get user feedback, iterate it to a place where it is fantastic and a really great experience, and then use that as a mode of communication to gain traction with stakeholders, because they will be able to see it and understand it much better for themselves.
Start with a small piece, get the stakeholders on board through that transparent communication and those very honest conversations.
So I'm sure, have you recognised that when you're dealing in a public service organisation with explaining that Agile's an approach that people should start to use, and you found difficulty doing so? Quite a lot of nodding heads in the audience. We've all been there. But one of the things that we're trying to pull out there is by showing things working and showing what you've delivered and showing things as you build them, it's a great way of helping start build what I'll get to at point 4 about momentum around what you're doing. So transformation, you need to have those examples to show people. The other thing is you also need to show the clear benefits of it working. So one of the things that when Obama became president in the United States, he set a quota of getting 25% of government procurement for technology to come from small businesses. In the UK, we were given the same mantra. We got to 50. So 50% of new spend on technology was with small businesses. Now, I'm going to explain a little bit about the benefits of that to the economy, but how did that happen? Well, the way it stopped is that we started procuring in a different way. So instead of buying from one big vendor, we started to buy using innovative suppliers who could work with the cloud. The UK went cloud first in 2013, 9 years ago. And the reason that that worked was you could start to build services using the cloud. It meant you got access to the best in the market to work with you. Some of the best in the market were the large system integrators. That was fine, but some of the best in the market were smaller businesses who had been essentially locked out by the prime model before. So it was a huge opportunity to grow, not just more efficient and get more innovation and get better services. And for half of the price, every pound we spent in this way saved a pound. It also meant that there was a huge benefit to the digital economy. There was a measurable effect on the economy of moving towards building from small companies. £1 billion a year started to go into the coffers of small businesses, which meant that they could start to grow effectively. And of course, that meant all the way around the country they started to grow, which meant the tax base went up, the tax take went up, and you could then start to generate more jobs, more skills, and more effective motors for improving the economy. Now, the guy who led that reform, one of those guys who led that reform is Warren Smith. And just give him a view here, talking you through what that looked like and how it worked.
So the Digital Marketplace is a platform that enables buyers across the public sector, so central government, local government, health, education, to interact with the providers of digital and technology products and services. So it's a very familiar look and feel for users who've become familiar and trust Gov.uk. But actually the platform itself is a relatively thin layer. There's a depth that sits behind it, which is all about the commercial agreements. In all of our interactions with overseas governments through the Global Digital Marketplace Programme, we have focused on 5 aspects to our work. One is around standards-based approaches to assuring plans before money is spent. 2 is around designing procurements and contracts to meet the needs of users. 3 is around ensuring service delivery once contracts have been awarded. 4 is around implementing open data around contracting and supplier ownership. And the 5th is around institutional capability and capacity building. We've got some amazing statistics and data that have demonstrated how these approaches have been dramatically shifting in terms of the market. So just in the year ending March 2020, for example, the Crown Commercial Service published its annual report and accounts, and within that it celebrates that they spent £1.23 billion directly with SMEs through all of their framework agreements. The digital marketplace accounted for 73% of that direct spend to SMEs. So again, it's coming back to, well, what are the characteristics of the approach that has led to that success? It's user-centred, it's design-led, it's open, it's collaborative, and it's driven by data.
So an important point there is that Warren was talking there not just about the reform in the UK, but also other governments and other public services around the world which have copied that approach. One thing's just to remember, governments don't compete. So you can actually start to copy and share things. I always say the Norwegian government doesn't run the driving license service in Sweden. They don't need to, they've got one. The British government is not going to set up a tax office in America again. You know, it's a simple and effective way because they've already got one. There is a way of government making sure that you can actually share the components that you work with, and we'll come back to that a bit later. The next bit is just think about the benefits, and often it's thought of as an obstacle to transformation, but actually the biggest benefit of transforming your government to the cloud is in security. We had a good talk about this morning. But the UK government and other governments around the world move to the cloud because of the security it gives them. That's the number one reason for doing it. When I started, I was given 300 data centers around the country, and I had no idea who was patching them. I had no idea who was feeding the guard dogs. I had no idea who was actually monitoring and making it work. And consequently, moving to the cloud was a really simple and secure way of resolving the consistency of my security posture by making sure that everything was done properly, which is what the cloud provided. So another transformation benefit is security. This is Ian McCormack. Ian is the Deputy Director of the National Cybersecurity Centre for the United Kingdom, which is the component of GCHQ, which looks after the delivery of security policy in government.
And one of the biggest challenges I was deeply involved with was probably the wholesale reform, how we think about security classifications. And despite the name, the work wasn't so much about the actual classification that was assigned to the document or to an object, but it was much more about reforming and changing how we approach security so that it can enable government to make much better use of contemporary technologies.
So I speak to a lot of governments and public sector organisations around the world. And it's such a common problem where they think they're being secure because they have an approach to security and data classification that had worked for them in previous decades. The National Cybersecurity Centre is very open in its advice and what works. And I think we're seeing this more and more, this open approach to transforming government, even when it comes to security. And I think one thing I learned in the cybersecurity community is, like digital, it's also community, and people like to share what works and doesn't work, and that makes them stronger and more secure.
So what was that modelling that changed? Well, some of you who've worked in public service and security will recognise what I'm about to show you, which is this is a classic classification model according to impact. The security should match the impact of what would happen if something went wrong with that, and then you define everything into those impact layers. And this was what we inherited. This was the sort of Cold War security approach, which I inherited. And I remember going to meetings to discuss this with people, and they would turn up with a briefcase handcuffed to their wrist with the plans in on paper. Now, one of the things about this that is entertaining is it's crazily complicated, and also it's builds in a lack of security because there's a competition to try and make everything really secure. But the problem with that is that you end up making everything less secure because you're freezing up what people do. People will make ways of working their way around it. And it was really difficult to explain to someone what the difference between something like confidential or restricted or protect was. Because what were those three different layers of working within a health system? Where did your health records sit within that component? And if there were lots of health records, were they more or less secure? I mean, that's a strange question, but obviously the number of records doesn't matter one bit. What matters is the sensitivity of them. So we changed it. And we changed it to make it more simple and more effective, but also to include what was and what worked. You see, we discovered that essentially the secret, top secret layers, which everybody wanted to be top secret, it was really great, it made you feel much better, but the problem was that if you define that for your security, that's really for intelligence agencies and military on deployment and anti-terrorism. Okay? That's what those two layers are for. And they should be protected, and we should spend a lot of our time and money, a lot of our money protecting them. But the official layer below that was for everything else in government that we wanted to protect properly. Remember, the one thing here that we had previously was we had a whole layer there, unclassified. Don't know. Oh, I don't know what the security is for that. But we were dealing with citizen records and citizen data. You want to provide that with the same level of security that if you were working in a great insurance company or a great bank or a great public service organization. You should afford everybody the same level of great industry level, top industry grade assurance. And also measure it against the threat that you're under. So essentially this meant that everything that went into the official bucket there, and that's 96% of everything that was being dealt with, got great levels of industry, the highest level of security that you need to work in industry for the delivery of public services. And that affected health records, that affected criminal records, that affected your police record, that affected your tax record, your benefit record. All of that was dealt with properly, and all of the security around that was consistent across government, but also consistent across the whole of the public service. And it meant that you made much more accessible security available to everybody, which meant that the whole system became more consistently secure. It was and therefore more secure. A really big step change. And you may have noticed in the lack of massive data breaches of how that's happened over time, that things have become much more secure, much more effective. But just to put the crowning note on that, this is the quote from the Ministry of Defence in the United Kingdom about cloud in that respect. And very clearly, cloud works at official. And therefore, we can do a better job of security in the cloud than we can on premise. That's the UK Ministry of Defence. It's a really, really powerful statement of using that benefit. So the benefit of transformation is also that you make your services more secure. So we create more jobs, we create a better economy, you make it more secure, you make it easier to build things. These benefits you need to get across, but you also need top-level support for that. So third stage, executive buy-in. Now, as I mentioned earlier, India is one of the greatest reforming countries and transformation. And the Aadhaar program in India was right at the heart of that. Aadhaar is the identity as a service from the Indian government, foundational ID service. And delivering that required huge amounts of support. Indeed, it had a cabinet minister responsible for it, who was appointed, Nandan Nilekani was appointed to the cabinet to drive through that reform. So I'm not saying you have to have everyone at cabinet level, but this is one of those changes that has made a huge difference to government. And let's just hear from Ganga about how that works, and Deepti, my colleague in India,
many Indian
about this.
languages. And India became pioneer in first nationwide digital ID project based on biometric that actually empowers and enables service delivery to the marginalized, and eventually ended up enrolling all the residents of the country. Aadhaar has become daily part of our lives now, be it peer-to-peer financial transactions, opening bank accounts, getting mobile connections. In times of COVID, the entire contact tracing, and now probably the backbone behind world's largest vaccination drive, the CoWIN platform that we have.
I think one of the biggest challenges which we faced was not having legal legitimacy in some sense of the word. What happened was the legal framework was not put in place, and we were working based on an executive order. And therefore, there was a lot of resistance and a lot of questions being raised of starting this without an act in place which clearly defined our role, our responsibilities, our objectives, and who are all the players. We were able to overcome this obstacle because of the strong political will that existed, which made sure that we could continue functioning while the legal framework was being put in place. So what I would say is, first of all, don't embark on the project unless there is strong political will to see it from beginning to end.
So I hope by identifying those benefits, you can then, that's when you can start, once you've got your ideas behind your reform, you start to get the political will behind it, the executive will behind it to get programs to move. We're going to talk a little bit in a minute about how to get that as well. But those benefits help you generate that. And then the next component of this is momentum, and actually having the ability to have continuous, relentless forward movement of your programs. So although transformation programs, everyone has this great idea at the beginning, the most important thing is just to keep going. Keep going and use the tools that are available to you to keep going. One of those tools is about, as we heard from Warren, and we've heard from others on this, is about being open. Being open not just with the data, but also open about your progress and open about the way that you work. Sharing the work and showing the things that you have built so that you generate the momentum behind what you're doing. And Caroline's going to talk a little bit now about, who's one of our transformation leaders in the UK, about the delivery of a change and also how to get momentum working for those open approaches. And she is going to talk a little bit about open source.
When you look at the public sector around the world, there are so many challenges that they're not unique to one particular country. They're shared by everyone because citizens will be renewing passports. There may be court booking systems or paying your tax. And governments don't compete with one another on any of these. They're just providing them within their own territories to their own citizens. In the end, globally, it delivers far higher quality citizen services and saves governments huge amounts of time and money.
So that ability to share and to use open source to help you move your programs faster is really powerful. One of the resources that Caroline's team built last year was called Open Government Solutions. And if you just Google Open Government Solutions, AWS service, it's a directory of all of the great open source services that each government, that multiple governments have built and shared amongst each other. One of the things about the government of New Zealand's website, the government of Israel's website, looks quite like the government of the United Kingdom's website. Reason? It is the government of the United Kingdom's website. We open sourced it. Same things with the notification program. Same things with a lot of the COVID contact tracing data. That was all, lots of that was based on the Singapore open source code for building in contact tracing. It's been a really powerful way of showing, being able to take components and capabilities other people have built and building your own on top of that. Because the thing that you need, remember I mentioned earlier, is speed and momentum. So just summing up and coming to a close, I want to talk a little bit about what gets in the way. So that's great. These are the things which help you move, and these are the things that get you going. But all of us find there are some blockers. And so as reformers, what I found most powerful was just to stop and think, what are the things that are stopping me getting going? Now, they differ for all of you. All of you have them. I'll share with you what mine were. Okay? So my square of despair was capability, legacy, security, and procurement. I have a colleague who came to me and said, well, I actually have a pentagon of pain. And, you know, it's a different way of looking at it, but just think about it. So we had a real problem with capability. So not only did we find it difficult to find people to come and work with us and find the technologists to come and work with us, but we also found it difficult to get the executive leaders to work alongside us and join in. Because, as Mike said earlier, people are used to doing things the way they've always done them. So how do you get reformers together? Well, we found the most powerful way of doing that was actually to train the executive leaders, to go and build that capability with the executive leadership. And so my team, working under Jonas in the Institute, we run an executive education program, which is free, where we take senior leaders in government through a 3-day program of the business change that is happening to them. It is not about the technology. It's about the business change that moving to the cloud means. And we find that really powerful in helping create a cadre of leaders who understand it. So if you are running a transformation program and you need that help in getting your senior leadership and your operational leadership to understand the reforms we're talking about, come talk to us about how an exec ed program can help you. It's really powerful, and it helps you get those people together behind you. We talked a little bit about procurement. So, you know, the main thing was getting through procurement, and by building the G-Cloud, the digital marketplace, we solved a lot of that. It's still got a long way to go, but making procurement generate economic growth through building and working with small businesses and innovative businesses was transformative and helped us move very fast. And you've seen that in Mexico, in Australia. We're working with the Brazilians on this. It's something which is happening, and the Canadians. It's something that's happening worldwide. The people are realizing that if you start buying and building from innovative companies, you will go faster. You just need that security and that scalability that comes from working with the cloud as well. I talked a bit about security as well, and that ability to move to a permissive security model where you deploy the best security in public services, the same as you would get in a bank, the same as you would get in an insurance company, the same as you would get in a great professional service organization. That really works in driving through the change. Of course, it means you can move and use the cloud, but it also means you get that better security and the consistency of security that you as a public official will need. And then finally, legacy. So one of the great things within any large organization is the legacy that you inherit and the legacy that you go and create and then you inherit from people. And one of the issues that with legacy is it's always really, really difficult to move that out of the way. Now, what worked in the UK may not work in other places. But what worked in the UK was we created a legacy IT company. And we moved all of the old dreadful IT, all these HP Superdomes and old sort of Unix boxes into the legacy IT function. And that's where they went. They went to die in that space. And then people knew that they were okay, knew that they were running all right, and then they could start building new services on the cloud. And that was a massively transformative moment for people because you could start to know, you could start to build your new services knowing that the legacy which you were worried about and it was being looked after and was just being taken away to its own Hotel California, where you could check it in, but the rule was it could never leave. And that's meant that more and more people are now able to safely deploy using the cloud to get moving. It was a really huge move. Quite counterintuitive in its own way, but it made that change. Now, those are the ones I had. You'll have different ones. I'd love to hear from you what your blockers are and how we'd like to work out how to help you get through them. But those are the blockers we faced. But there is a benefit at the end of this, and the benefit is this. If you start to deliver better citizen experience, where citizens start to use your services more effectively, for much less money, with your better delivery function, you will be able to realize cost savings. And you can reinvest those cost savings in a better citizen experience, which means you're able to deliver better services. So every time somebody rings a call center or rings into government, it costs around $20. Every time somebody calls in. That's the cost of running the call center, putting it together, old traditional call center, and the staff time. Every time somebody does a transaction online, it costs, if you're effective, under a penny, under a cent. Let's say 5 cents. The difference between those two things is huge. So the dynamic of being able to move onto online, the economics are there. What I hope we've just shown you is that the route to get there is about realizing benefits, having a clear vision, being able to identify and get executive buy-in, and generating momentum. Those 4 things can help you generate the changes you need in order to make those services more effective. They then become cheaper. You can then build better services and reinvest those savings. And where we've really seen that work is where the reinvestment of the identification of the savings and the reinvestment of some of that money can go back into it. We didn't reinvest all of the money back into what we were doing. We saved £4 billion in 4 years, so we couldn't spend that. But we managed to get that saving going and then investing and generating more effective services with more departments. And that, in its own way, creates that culture and that momentum for reform, which helps it move forward. So, I hope by explaining what we've just done and those examples, you've seen how digital transformation can work within the public service, that you can use some of the tools that we've talked about to help you move faster. And if you're a partner, you can use some of the tools we've talked about to help your customers and your colleagues within public service move faster and accelerate their reforms. Thanks very much. Thanks for laughing at the jokes. I'm going to put something different on the screen now as we go through it, but I'd be really keen to hear from you, and this is the time when it comes to you, what are the challenges you face, and what are the blockers you face as you try and move reforms through in the public service? And also do, please, if there are any points that weren't clear, please point those out. So, yes, sir. Thanks.
Hi there. First of all, thanks for me presenting. My name is Mike Hahn Lake. I'm from BidScale. Unfortunately, this is not exactly what you asked for, but you said something at the beginning that I was wondering if you could shed a little more light on.
Yeah.
Asking you to go back to your CTO days. So when you talk about trust and momentum and building that stuff, if I'm tracking the time from you were there, on the one hand, you're building GDS, which is this incredible thing. It's a combination of technology, bureaucracy hacking, but you need people to trust this new thing actually works. The flip side, not to take Ian McCormick's thunder, but you have NCSC, which comes out of one of the most secretive organizations on the entire island, and people are supposed to trust it. And they did an amazing job. If you look at it, whether your branding is crickets, with that whole thing about crickets in their annual report, getting people to actually believe in it, engender that trust. Those seem like two totally separate problem sets and two totally separate approaches. Do you have any sort of lessons learned or wisdom about how you approach each one? Did it find out it was the same thing and sort of that nature?
Sorry. I'm Dave Warnick. I'm the director of IT for Cecil County, Maryland. So we're a rural county. And so a couple of the challenges we're having are legacy. Actually, we're kind of lucky in that we don't have real legacy technology like mainframes because county IT is only like 20 years old. So it's kind of worked out. We started on Windows. But we still have Windows 2003 servers floating around. But we're slowly getting all of those things migrated off. First has been just getting change in the county. Like people are so used to doing things in a certain way. That's been a big challenge. We're starting to kind of get past that. But there's one of the big problems we're running into is we've got to run 2 environments. So there's a lot of costs associated with keeping all of our legacy technology up and running while paying for all these cloud services that we're starting to roll out. And so we're seeing that dual cost, and that's been challenging. But what was you kept mentioning about government services that are available. What was that? Open Government Solutions. Okay. Okay. Gotcha, okay. And And are a lot of those pretty much turnkey? Okay, because I don't have a development team. I have a network operations team and a desktop team, really, so.